We've all been watching and reading about the demonstrations that have been going on all over the country, all over the world, in fact. And it's made me think about myself. And though I didn't demonstrate this time, and to be honest, I would have loved to demonstrate, but I was too nervous because of the pandemic and my age, and I have some underlying health conditions. I didn't march. But I did march when I was younger. I was reflecting on that recently. I marched the first time when I was 19 years old. I drove with friends all the way from Champaign, Urbana, Illinois to Washington, D.C. to march against the Vietnam War. And then when I was a little older, I marched and I demonstrated for Soviet Jews. That was a big cause for me. Our anthem was "Let My People Go." I did guerrilla theater in the streets. That was a cause very dear to my heart. And then, of course, I marched and I demonstrated for Israel many times. And for women's rights. I was a woman's liber, as they called it, and very proud. And I insisted on being called Ms., not Miss. And I was always talking about women's rights. So one would think you could be proud of doing those things, but when I reflect today, I realize that I only demonstrated for things that were about me, that affected me. I'm ashamed to say that I never marched for civil rights. I never marched for gay and lesbian rights. During the terrible AIDS epidemic, I felt bad, but I didn't do anything about it. I knew about it. I had some friends who had AIDS, but it wasn't about me. It wasn't my cause. And that kind of reminds me of the Torah portion this week called Korach, about a powerful leader of the Israelites. He was actually a cousin of Moses. They were in the same tribe. And he got a group of 250 leaders, and they demonstrated for their own cause. They wanted power equal to Moses. They didn't really think about their credibility or if they were doing anything for the people. They just got together and advocated for themselves. They said, why are you better than we? We could do the same job you have, and we all want to be leaders. And he got a lot of people, 250 of the top leaders. So they were sort of demonstrating for their own cause. And I realized that that's the way it's been for a lot of us for many years. When it affects us, we step up. But otherwise, except for very rare and wonderful people, we usually don't. Until now. I don't know why I'm getting choked up, but it's very moving that people are stepping up for not their own cause, but for the cause of their fellow human beings. For this case, the African Americans. For some reason, suddenly there's this awakening going on. Our eyes are starting to open to the fact that when other people are suffering or humiliated, it affects all of us. Perhaps it's because of the pandemic. Suddenly with this terrible coronavirus all over the world, we're interested in what's going on in China and in Italy and in England, because in New York when all the people were dying, because suddenly we're saying, that could be me. I'm no different. That could be me. And it seems to have softened our hearts and opened us. And suddenly we're seeing things that were always there, this terrible treatment of a segment of our population. And we're being led by the young people. My daughter did demonstrate. She wore a mask and she got tested afterwards for COVID, but she said, I have to go out there. I have to speak out because our hearts are softened and there's this opening of our eyes. That could be me. And this gives me a lot of hope for our country, for our society, that suddenly all these fragmented groups are starting to identify and realize how alike we are. Not that it's anything new, because our greatest, what I call Jewish prophets, the two greatest Jews, in my opinion, of the 20th century, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and Elie Wiesel, spoke about this poignantly, fervently begging us to see this, to see things that they saw years ago. I just want to read a couple of quotes from them to show you what I mean. Rabbi Heschel gave this speech in 1963, and this is what he said. To think of man, we would say humanity, in terms of white, black, or yellow is more than an error. It is an eye disease, a cancer of the soul. How many disasters do we have to go through in order to realize that all of humanity has a stake in the liberty of one person? Whenever one person is offended, we are all hurt. What begins as inequality of some inevitably ends as inequality of all. That was in 1963. And Elie Wiesel, when he accepted his Nobel Prize, in his acceptance speech, said this in 1986. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. Whenever men or women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that must, at that moment, become the center of the universe. So these are words that we've heard before or have been spoken before, but we never heard. This is a vision that has been put before our eyes, but we've never really seen. So I'm hoping that we will no longer be like Korach, or even me in my younger days advocating for my causes alone, but realizing that all people's causes of suffering and humiliation are our causes. And may we continue to awaken and speak out and connect with each other. Amen.